What's up, crew? Welcome back to Libertalia Game Supply. So I was sorting through some bulk, trying to see if there's anything interesting to pull out, and I happened across some counter fairy stuff, and it reminded me that this deck exists. I had not thought about it in a while. It's not really received any support since that structure deck all those years ago, apart from this, which, I had seen the card, obviously, in Cyberstorm Access, I think it was, and it vaguely dawned on me that that was what this was, but I never read it, never really thought much about it, and then I realized that that's what it was, and so I figured, I want to play around with it. I want to see how it works. And ultimately, this was the build I ended up landing on. This down here, Disregard, I was considering trying to play this little engine in there just to have it to be a little bit more dimensional, because as it is now, it's fairly one-dimensional. You're basically just trying to put like a Floodgate monster on board with a couple of the cards that get benefits from when you activate counter traps, and then outside of that it's just a grind game. You're just putting all of the negates you possibly can on the board. You're just shutting down play after play after play, and ideally they are running out of resources before you do, and then you're just slowly chipping away at life points with the monsters you're leaving on board. Because that's the play style, it's kind of an older school play style, it's pretty easy to take it apart. If they're able to get rid of some of your advantage monsters, then you're really not benefiting off of your traps other than being negates, and it's pretty easy to run out of those negates after a turn or two if you're not getting the draws and the searches and whatever else from all your monsters that generate the advantage. You also can't really afford to play a whole lot of monsters, so no hand traps, because you already have your negates here. It's just if you go second, you're in a really bad spot, and hand traps will eat up anything that can put you in a position to actually get the deck functioning right, so it didn't really have room for any of that. And then the idea here was just that it can create something that at least resembles a combo. Condemned Winch would search one of these, and then you contribute it to special summon one of your level 4 fairies from your deck. So at least at that point, you're generating a plus off of a monster summon rather than them just sitting there and then the plus doesn't come until you use something, and then it's really just a 1-for-1. However, the issue here was the same issue with the hand traps. You really just don't have room to play around with a whole lot of other stuff unless you change what it is you want the deck to do altogether, and that's just not really the point. So triple Bountiful Artemis, when a counter trap activates, you get to draw one. They stack, so if you get all 3 on board, you draw 3 every time a counter trap activates. Pretty nuts. Triple Guiding Ariadne, if it's in the Pendulum Zone, you don't have to pay life points or discard for counter trap activation, so all of these that you pay life points, and then this one you have to pay and discard to use, they're now free. Apart from this, you still need to reveal a counter trap in your hand, which kind of sucks. When it's on the field, if it gets destroyed by battle or card effect, reveal 3 counter traps from your deck. Your opponent gets to pick one, give it to you, the rest go back in your deck. And because we're playing a lot of 3-ofs, you can kind of pick which one you get, but that's really only early game. Once you get to a point where you've used a few of these, obviously you're just going to show them whatever's left in your deck, and they're going to give you the one that they think's not going to bother them all that much. You have ways to recycle some of the traps out of your graveyard at the very least, so you can kind of play around with that, but it's less powerful the longer the game goes on. I've only got 2 Harvest Angel of Doom, and really you could probably go to 1 to make room for something else. I had it at 3. It really doesn't do much after it's done what it's meant to do. So on summon, it searches the Horn of Heaven, just the regular one, and that's relevant because the Horn of Heaven requires you tribute something in order to get its negate effect, and so by summoning it and searching this, you now have that tribute fodder available. It doesn't really do anything outside of that when it's on the board other than being a level 4, which can be relevant for the extra deck. Then were you to use the Horn of Heaven and tribute the Harvest Angel of Doom, it would then put itself in the Pendulum Zone. When it's in the Pendulum Zone, it can search the Black Horn of Heaven just by activating its effect. Now, you don't have to go through those steps. You can just activate it straight to the Pendulum Zone to get the Black Horn, and the Black Horn is by far the better one, so that might be a good play to go with. Really, the only reason it's not at 1 is because you do have a 3 and an 8 scale here, so you would be able to Pendulum summon the rest of your monsters in your deck if you happen to have these. That's not really a big part of the deck. You're not really focused on special summoning, but it does exist, so you can use it when it comes up. Now these next 3 are mostly Ties of the Brethren targets. They all have effects that activate when you use counter traps. For the Minerva, it immediately gains 500 attack upon the activation of the counter trap, and it stays, so it'll just keep climbing. So this is going to be one of your bigger monsters after 1 or 2 turns of using your trap cards. And when that effect activates, if Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you also get to take one of your traps out of your graveyard, put it back in your hand. One of your counter traps specifically, which is pretty much all we play other than the Fallen Sanctuary. From LTL, you gain 1,000 life points when you activate a counter trap, and then if Sanctuary Sky is on the field, you also get to destroy a card your opponent controls. It's more for that second effect, which is contingent on having a Sanctuary in the Sky, which we play 2 versions of here. But if you do get that set up, having a negate plus a pop every time you activate a counter trap is pretty good. And then this one's probably my least favorite. Although it doesn't require Sanctuary to be on the field, you have to negate a spell or trap to get its effect. If you were to do that, you can add a light fairy monster from your deck to your hand. It's a once per turn also, where these ones are not, so it's less good by far than these two in my opinion. But you just need the targets for ties to be live, because it's kind of how you set up a board that isn't just one monster set 5 pass. The one barrier statue of the heavens, because it fits in perfectly with the ties of the brethren play style that we're going for here. It really shuts down decks pretty well. If you're playing against a light based deck, obviously you would just side this out and play something else. But even if you are playing against a light based deck, a lot of extra decks are not going to necessarily line up with the archetype that they are in, and so you still would shut down some extra deck summoning. There's just going to be less so. And then the one Sacred Arcanite Parshath. This is in here for a couple of reasons. One, you don't really have any huge bodies on board, so these are all pretty easily attacked over. They do get a little attack boost from Sanctum. However, if your opponent can get just any decent extra deck monster on board, they can probably attack over any of these. Whereas this guy's got 2800, it can special summon itself, so when you activate a counter trap, you can banish 2 fairies from your hand or graveyard and then special summon it. And it can do that effect out of your hand or out of your graveyard, so you can keep recycling it, I suppose. You don't play that many monsters, so the fairies that you have available to banish probably will be slim pickings. When it's on the field, it also does do piercing damage, and then whenever it inflicts damage to your opponent's life points, you can search a Parshath card or a counter trap from your deck to your hand. And then for your Parshath cards, you're playing the Rebirth, you're playing the Sanctum, so you have some search targets. And then obviously you're playing a whole lot of counter traps, so you have search targets there. It's also summonable off of the Rebirth, so that is another reason why it's in here. For the spells, we got Triple Ties of the Brethren. It's a pretty important piece of this deck. You're just hoping to open ties plus any of your fairies plus as many traps as possible in order to summon whatever fairy you got, activate the ties, probably throw out the barrier statue and one of these or one of these, just so that you can start getting those benefits off of your counter traps activating. It shuts off your ability to special summon, but you don't really need it anyway. You're trying to leave these guys on the board, and then you can't battle that turn, which, you know, it's a fair exchange, because you're going to put like 6k on board more or less whenever you use this, and you're going to generate a ton of advantage, so small price to pay. We got Triple Extravagance just because it is a extra deck, not heavy deck at all. You don't really use the extra deck all that much, and so it's not a heavy cost to draw 2, and the draw 2 can be really beneficial just because there's not a whole lot of other draw in the deck other than the Bountiful, so you're not paying that much in terms of like losing out on the Bountiful's effect, and just getting those couple extra back row cards can be what saves you for another turn or two. I'm playing the one Time Tearing Morganite. I just thought it was an interesting idea. I had it at 3. It sucks at 3 just because it doesn't give you an immediate advantage other than the double summon, and we don't really need the double summon. With the ratios here, you're not really going to open more than 1 or 2 monsters in your opening hand most of the time anyway, and we're really looking more for the ties play than we are for a double summon play. However, because it's a grind deck, you're probably going into turns 2, 3, 4, and so on until the game's over, and so getting to draw 2 each turn does a lot in being able to set up that back row over and over again, and so when it comes up, it's cool. When it doesn't, it's whatever. We've got the one Sanctum of Parshath, acts as the Sanctuary while it's on the field, so that is what is going to allow you to activate a lot of these other effects. It also bumps everything by 300 attack and defense, all of your fairies that is. And while it's on the field, set back row cards cannot be destroyed or targeted, and that's yours and your opponent's. So that kind of sucks if you're playing against a deck that also plays back row. You can't really do anything to remove it, but yeah, you got to protect your own, so you got to do that. And then once per turn, it will also allow you to take 3 of your fairies or counter traps, all with different names, and then put them back on top of your deck in whatever order, so you can stack your deck with whatever counter trap you want on your next draw, or whatever fairy you need on your next draw. And so because it only puts it right on top, I guess it's good because it lets you anticipate your turn for the next turn. But if it's early game or something, it doesn't do much for getting you to a better play, so it's an okay spell. And then we got the one Card of Demise, just because it's a back row deck. You can very easily set your whole hand, draw 3, set the rest of your hand, get your normal summon, whatever it is, and be done with it. Into the counter traps, we've got the Triple Judgment, we got the Triple Strike, and we got the Double Warning. I chose these at 3 and this at 2 just because these two don't negate monster effects. They only negate summons and spell and trap activations, where this one does negate monster effects, which is not something that you have in like high numbers in the deck outside of that, so playing the third one seemed like it makes sense to me. The Judgment also only costs half, it doesn't cost required life point total, and so it's always live, whereas the Warning in late game, if you've lost a lot of life points, it can become a dead card. We've got Triple Draco, Utopian Aura. When an opponent's monster activates its effect, you can negate and destroy it, and then if you have a card in your hand, you can banish that card and then special summon the monster you just negated and destroyed to your field, but its effects are negated. I've never really used that effect, mostly because you're not carrying a hand very often, and if you are, it's going to be for a reason. You're like holding onto a counter trap for rebirth or something of that nature, and so just the negate and destroy is plenty to get value out of this. We've got the two horns as previously discussed, and then we've got two drastic drop-off. When your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, including by drawing them, you can activate this, make them discard one, so kind of cool. This could be something else if there's a different counter trap you like better. I just thought that was a pretty cool effect. And then we got the double rebirth. It can negate a spell or trap or monster effect by revealing a counter trap, paying 1,000 life points, and discarding a card. Now if you have the Guiding Ariadne, you only need to reveal the counter trap, but for this cost and the result to be you get a special summon of a monster, most of which don't really do much in terms of progressing your own game state, and just a negation, it's just not that good. Like, it's very easily dead if you open this and don't have a way to get to either the Sanctum or Fallen. It's just not a very good card. I even considered dropping it to 1, but that special summon can be relevant. When you activate the card, it lets you special summon a Parshath monster from your deck or extra deck, so that would be the Sacred, the Celestial, and the Avenging can all be summoned. And they've got some interesting effects. It's just nothing super powerful, and nothing happens on summon, and so it's not, like, you're just leaving a body there. And then for our final trap, we've got the one Fallen Sanctuary. This could just be a second copy of this if you wanted it to be easier to have that face up, but you're not going to counter trap on turn 1, so setting this and then activating it on your opponent's turn is essentially the same thing. This also allows you to banish a fairy from your graveyard and then negate the effect of a monster your opponent controls, which could be relevant after a turn or two. For the extra deck, we're playing 3 of the Celestial and 3 of the Avenging, just because we are playing the Pot of Extravagance, and we always want to have something available to make Rebirth live if we're going to play the Rebirth, so tripled up on each of those. The Celestial also can help you search the Sanctum, so you can discard a card, add a Sanctuary in the Sky or a card that mentions it, which would be Fallen or Sanctum. That effect can also search fairy monsters, so there are some that do specifically mention Sanctuary in the Sky, which you'd be able to search. If you already have a Sanctuary in the Sky on board, it just lets you search any fairy monster. And then its last effect is pretty irrelevant. If a fairy you control dies, you can banish a fairy from your graveyard and then special summon a fairy from your hand whose level is higher than the banished monster. But we only play 4s and this, and so unless this happens to be in your hand, you can't even use that effect, and it doesn't matter anyway. It's not that great of an effect. The Avenging has a Book of Moon effect. You can just target something, flip it face down, and then it can do piercing battle damage. Pretty simple. The Double Baguska, just because it's a stall deck. The one Tornado Dragon, you could replace this with something else, maybe like the Typhon or something like that. I don't know. It just back row destruction when we don't really have any seemed like an okay choice. The one Exciton and the one Zeus, just so we can get those board wipes. And then this is how I'm going to manage not being able to really summon any huge monsters, is this is our huge monster. You can pretty easily get 2 level 4s on board, make the Utopia Lightning, make him 5k attack, and you can do it twice if you need to, because it's going to be a long game with this deck. That'll wrap it up for this one, though. I just thought it was an interesting, old-school feeling type of deck. It's got a different play style than a lot of stuff that exists today. If you try it out, let me know. If there's other super secret techs that you know of that I'm not playing here, definitely let me know about that. It's a pretty cheap deck. You can see here, main deck is like 30 bucks, extra deck is 68, and I'm not really sure why. I tried to play around with taking stuff out. I guess Zeus is like 18 bucks, but a lot of this stuff's like $1, so I don't know if that's accurate or if I'm just stupid. I do know Exciton is apparently like an $8 to $20 card now, depending on the version of the card you buy, which is news to me. Zeus is also getting a reprint in that 2-player starter deck thing that's coming out fairly soon, and so that'll probably be like $5. So all in all, you could buy this whole main and extra deck for probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to $100 in whenever that set releases, and so not a terribly expensive deck, just for fun. I hope release day for Age of Overlord went well for everybody. I hope you pulled all the greatest stuff you could have ever dreamed of. Happy deck building. I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good one. Goodbye.